Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Crush Live Poker. I am your host, Bart Hanson. Today we're going to be doing another 5-5, 300 to 500 no-limit hold'em game, which is a capped game. And part of the reason why we've been doing these capped games lately is just because that's actually what's been running on Live at the Bike. I've got some footage from some 5-10s and stuff coming up. We're supposed to be playing some 10-20s possibly next week. But I am in the game. There I am right here in seat 6. This is a game that you can buy in for 300 min and 500 max. I brought over 500. If you've ever listened to my podcast, and you'll see it here in a second as I run this hand, I truly believe that a lot of live players don't know how to keep track of pot size. So I like to put big chips in the pot. So when I'm playing in this like a capped game, I'll buy in for like 2 stacks of yellow, which are $5 chips, and then 3 whites. And then when I'm trying to bet a hand for value, I will use the whites and take back yellows to make sure that my opponent knows how much money is in the pot. It leads to bigger value betting, basically. And that's the purpose of why I do that. So I try to keep as many whites on the table. But you'll see a lot of guys that will just have stacks and stacks of yellows. And again, you know, I've got aces here, by the way, and I made it, I think, 20 and got a couple callers. But we'll get to that in a second. But it just comes to a point where if you've got $800 in yellows in there, it's a lot more difficult for someone to realize how much money is in the pot, especially if they're not keeping track of it in their head, than if there's 8 white chips. So normally I am betting for value, and I want my amateur opponents to know how much money is in the pot. So I will intentionally, like I said, when I bet like maybe 75, I'll throw a white chip and I'll say 75. The chip will get in there, and then they'll give me some yellows back. And that's kind of my technique to make the pot actually look as big as it is. Because, you know, I think people have problems just identifying how big something is when things are in clusters. It's kind of a thing where you see... Somebody told me some story about how in some Native American languages, there isn't a word for multiple numbers, it's just one or many. And that's how a lot of us think about it. So when you're dealing with big clusters of small chips, people just look at it like a massive chips, and they have absolutely no idea, you know, how big the pot is at all. So there's just a little bit of that, and that's why I've got the white chips here. And this is towards the beginning of my session, and I've raised it up to, I think, $20, and I got 3 callers here. And you can see 10-5 deuce with a couple clubs. And, you know, this is a spot, and you'll see it later on in one of the hands in the video, where it's actually a really good spot where I can actually make a bluff raise. I don't know if I would do it with this many people in the hand, but a lot of times a guy leading out here will have a 10. He might have a club draw. He might have pocket 9s, especially if he's heads up. And you've got to realize sometimes that when you lead out with a hand like King 10, if you are up against a good player, you might get yourself into a spot where you might get bluff raised. Now, in this particular scenario, you know, he let out 40 into a pot of about 80. I just didn't want to call here and let people in behind for cheap. I kind of wanted to define my hand a little bit. And, you know, I think that the best play for me here is to kind of make a small raise. And that's exactly what I end up doing. I think I'm about to raise this to 100. And I don't expect a whole lot of 10s and stuff to fold. But it's kind of a twofold thing, especially in a capped game where I think that you probably should be raising your overpairs on some boards, especially with people behind you, just because you bet 40, or this guy bets 40 and 80, and you call, and all of a sudden the guys to your left are getting 4-1. And I made it 100, and this dude here with the King 10, you know, quickly folded, but you can definitely get into some awkward spots where on a board like this and a guy leads into you, it's like, well, you know, am I way ahead, am I way behind, do I want to raise a 10 off of the hand? Well, not necessarily, but a lot of times I think that really one of the best plays to make is to make a small raise, kind of a play that, you know, now you will kind of rope them in. Now, if you were playing deeper, especially in a 5-10 game, and you raised and you got bet 3-bet, you're going to be put to the test. But a lot of times at this level, at a capped game, that type of thing is not going to happen. I was really surprised that this dude, you know, folded to 10, but I definitely did not want people to basically have the odds to come behind with, almost anything here. Definitely flush draws, straight draws, club draws, whatever. But I kind of hopped into this hand. But again, if you don't follow me on Twitter, check me out on Twitter at Bart Hansen. I kind of sent out a strategy podcast. Excuse me. I send out a strategy tweet every day. And of course, you can check out my podcast at deucescracked.com, deucescracked.com/podcast, Deuce Plays Premium. And we are going to be doing most of the hands here from this episode are going to be of me playing, but we're going to get into some hands here that I thought were interesting as well that don't involve me. Moving along here, I actually wanted to keep this up. The very next hand, as I'm clumping my chips in from when this guy folds, the very next hand, I'm in the big blind, and I pick up aces again. And you'll see it here. It's going to be back-to-back aces. This is about maybe 20 or 30 minutes into the show, into this session. And I want to bring this hand up because I think that people can play aces and kings in this manner, and they don't think about it a lot. You will typically get into situations where, so I'm in the big blind here with aces, and I think it's going to get folded around to this dude over here who's really short. And he opens to like 25, okay? And I think he has only 75 left. But it really holds true for the same concept. This guy calls, and at this point, I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to make a tiny raise back, like 30 back. I think I meant to make it 35 back, just so that this guy doesn't really have the correct odds to set mine. And I think I kind of made a little bit of a live misclick. I think I was taking a shot over here with this dude in seat 8. And I think I only ended up making it like something like $25 more when I meant to make it 35 more. The raise was to 25, and I ended up making it 25 more for 45. I guess I only made 25 more for 45. This guy calls, which is like unbelievable. I mean, he's got like a $70 stack left, and then the other dude tags along as well here with about over a $300 stack, and you can see here that the board comes out 5. Deuce, deuce. Now, this is a spot where a lot of people, and you see there actually that I thought about it for a while, or thought about it for a couple seconds, and I checked. And I've done this in deeper games as well. Because you get into a spot with aces or kings, and you have 3-bet a guy from out of position. And let's say that he is short. Now, this guy's got way less. I mean, this guy's really short. But let's say that the guy's got maybe like a pot to a pot and a half size bet left. So like in a 5-10 game, maybe a guy, with a $600 or $700 stack open for, 50, and you made it, 140 or 150, and he called, and now the pot's 300, and he's got like 400 or 500 left. I think one of the best plays to make when you are out of position with aces and kings, and to some extent you can do it with queens, but you're vulnerable to some overcards, is to actually check that. To check a 5-deuce-deuce board, because any pair is going to bet there. Like a pair of 8s or pair of 9s that's kind of trying to figure out what you're going to do is going to bet. And you also will get hands like ace-king and ace-queen to bluff at it. And especially with aces, you're basically not vulnerable to any card. I mean, with kings and queens, the guy might check behind and he could hit an overcard on the turn. But when you're playing relatively shallow against opponents in a 3-bet pot, especially from out of position, I really think that you can check one street. And you can even do it in position too. Like you could 3-bet a guy and then check back like a paired board. Just to get several streets of value and to also induce bluffs. Because remember, in capped games, you can afford to miss a bet on a certain street when a guy only has 1 or 2 pot-sized bets left, which is usually what happens in a capped game. Once you make a 3-bet, if a guy is starting with 500 here in this 5-5 game, and he opens to 20 and you make it 70 and he calls, now he's got maybe 430 and the pot's 150. Well, he actually has 3 pot-sized bet lefts. But let's say he started with 400. Now the pot's like 150 and he's got about 330 left. You can easily get the money in on two streets. Now, I'm never really a proponent of slow playing or anything like that, because I think a lot of times it kills your action and it does more harm than good. But in this particular scenario where you've got a big pocket pair and you 3-bet out of position and the board comes out low, I think that checking is absolutely fine with your big hands, and that's exactly what I did. Especially when this guy was so short, I just felt like he was going to just commit with anything. I mean, I figured that he would have gotten it in pre-flop with his sevens, but once I check here, I think he's basically going to bet almost 100% of his range here, because you just don't see guys play aces or kings like this, you know, necessarily at this level. And I checked and he bet, and I kind of was trying to rope this guy in as well, because, you know, what if the board had come out like 9 deuce deuce here, and I checked and this guy bet and this guy called? Well, now I can rope this guy in and tag him along actually for more value, because if I bet and this guy shoves and this guy has top pair, you know, he might make a fold. Or if I make a standard bigger type of continuation bet and this guy moves all in, you know, a needier guy in seat 5 might not continue on with his, you know, top pairish hand. But if I check and that guy bets and this guy calls, now I can, like I said, I can just tag this guy along, you know, for more value. So moral of the story is, when you 3-bet with a big pocket pair out of position against a guy that's short and the board comes out raggy and you're not scared of anything, it's not a bad idea to check, because he's going to get it in with all of his pairs. And for example, like say you 3-bet here and like you 3-bet with aces and the board, and a guy with like a $200 stack called you with tens and the board came out like queen 4-5 and you checked. That guy's going to move in with tens a lot. If you come out and bet, he might fold. You know, or jack 5-4 with pocket nines. If you come out and bet, there's a possibility he might fold. If you check, he's going to bet, and even if he checks it back, you are going to be able to extract, you know, value, you know, later on, you know, in the hand. Gonna get into another hand here that involves aces, and this is a guy I'd never seen before in seat number 1. He chooses to limp in with aces, and you'll see that play a lot. He was under the gun, and that's why sometimes anytime you've got a guy who's under the gun betting at a pot, no matter really what the board is, and you know, even if it's especially like a low board, you always have to take into account that he could have limped in with a big pocket pair. Now he comes out and he bets pot here. He bets 20 into, you know, a pot of about $20 on a king 3-10 board here. You can see that Igor has queen jack, and Igor makes the check call. Turn card here is the 9 of spades, and I think that that's actually not a bad play here for Igor to check. And kind of going along with what I said in my podcast and a little bit on Crush Live Poker last week, I'm always a fan of slow playing, but I think that the times that you can check raise are the times that the draws don't obviously come in and you are deeper in relation to the pot size. And what I mean by that is that right now the pot's $40, $60. So if Igor were to come out and bet 50, you know, Gevic could call, and now the pot's 160, and now maybe, you know, Igor comes out and bets 140 on the river, and Gevic calls, and Igor makes, you know, maybe 50 big blinds in the hand. But if Igor comes out and check raises this turn, he actually builds a pot up. Now, at the higher levels, I don't like to check raise the necessarily obvious draws for value, because I think I blow off some of the hands that will call me if I just come out and bet the turn. But at these levels, when it seems like everybody's calling with anything, I actually don't think a check raise on the turn is that bad of a play. I do think it's a bad play when the flush comes. I don't think that you should try to check raise the turn when the flush card comes. That's because a lot of times the guy isn't going to bet. And even the, you know, most casual of players will always notice that the flush has come in. But sometimes when you have a, you know, a combo draw where you've got a flush draw and a straight draw, I would come out and lead the turn when I hit my flush, but check the turn when I hit my straight. And this is kind of a similar situation. Igor was open-ended, and I don't think it's a bad play if you're going to check call with an open-ended straight draw to check the turn when you make the straight, because it's really not all that obvious to the most, to some of the casual players, and it's a great way to get more money in the pot. So he checks it here. The pot's, $60. Gevic here started basically full stack. He started with 500, and Gevic's like, come out and pot. He bets 55 here, and this is just a great spot to make a check raise here. He bets 55. Now the pot's 115. Once you call, the pot's 170. I would probably bump it up at least 100 more so that when he called, the pot's 370. And he did. He bumped it up 100 more. So when Gevic calls, the pot now is 370. Now Gevic's got about 300 left. And you're hoping that the flush cards don't come. The river's a 9. It pairs the board. It's basically an inconsequential card in the sense that, I mean, if he's full, but at this point, I'm just going for straight value here. And if I only raise it 100 on the turn, then I'm probably going to move all in here at the end. Because I think that Igor makes a mistake. He bets 200 into a pot of 370, leaving Gevic with 100 left. And you can see how quickly Gevic makes that call with the aces. But to be honest with you, in this game, it really is about sizing and trying to get the maximum value for your hand. And once you check raise the turn and that guy calls you, he either has a heart draw that's missed and he's not going to call any amount of money, or he has a king. And if he's got a king and he called your check raise on the turn, he's going to think that you bluffed out, you missed out on some sort of draw. So when I make it 100 more on the turn, then pot's 370. The only move really here is to shove it all in. I am going to move all in. It's different than if it was like in some sort of deeper game where, an all-in might be a gross overbet of the pot. But these are the small types of mistakes that you run into and you can encounter. And these are the types of things that you need to avoid to increase your win rate. And realize that if he's going to call a $200 bet, he's going to call all in for a $300 bet. So the whole point of turn raising to spike the pot up to get his money in, well, if you're going to make a small check raise on the turn for like 1/4 pot size bet like Igor did, then you've got to move in on the river, or make a bigger check raise on the turn and then make a smaller all-in bet on the river to get a guy like Gevic here to commit himself. Our next hand's going to involve like a little bit of a lesson in hand reading, and it's a really, really weird spot. It's going to involve this guy in seat number 5 and seat number 2, and I believe that seat number 2 here is going to open for a raise, and we'll see the cards get populated. You can see here that Gevic just stacked off with his aces, and I believe that actually, excuse me, it was seat 1 that raised to 20. The guy in seat 2 calls. The guy in seat 5 calls. I'm out of the hand. And it's going to get multi-way action here. It's going to get around here multi-way. And, yeah. So, and it's actually 25. So Gevic has raised it up to 25, and I think we're going to see it like 4 or 5 ways here. Gevic kind of tilting off a little bit. He's got the ace-5 suited. And you can see here that Alan has flopped trip 9s. He calls the raise. He checks. It's an extremely dry board here. And in reality, I think that once Gevic checks here and Alan checks, what people don't realize when I talk about opening your game up from fit or fold hold'em to making moves, people always say, well, what are the types of what are the types of situations in No Limit where I don't have to have a hand where I can attack the pot and try to win the pot? And I always talk about limped pots, and I talk about pots where the pre-flop raiser, single raise pots where the pre-flop raiser has checked. And that's exactly what's happened here. So Gevic checks, Alan checks here, and you don't really expect anyone to have a deuce in their hand when they call a raise unless they have ace deuce. So really, in reality, if I'm Jonathan or if I'm Igor, I think that both hands are fine. Both have one overcard and a backdoor flush draw. If I'm either of these guys, I'm going to probably come out and bet with position here, because I just think that it's so hard for anybody to have hit this flop. And normally Alan's not going to have anything after he checks to the left of the pre-flop raiser unless he's slow playing a deuce, but he's not going to have a 10. So especially if it gets checked to Igor. I mean, in reality, he's going to be able to take that pot down a lot. Sometimes you'll see a guy get frustrated and call with like ace king, ace queen, something like that. But really, one of these two guys should have bet, I think, in my opinion. Anyways, it ends up getting checked through here. You can see that the turn is the three of hearts here, and now Alan is going to come out and make a decent sized bet. I think he bets maybe 55 here. And again, this is just a spot where for Jonathan, he's picked up a heart draw. But in reality, as long as, I think that you can easily bump this up here for a raise. And a lot of times a guy might just have ace high when he's leading out here on the turn. He might have a 3, like 5-3. And if you bump up the turn here, or he could have a hand like pocket 6s, pocket 7s, where he checked it, he wanted to see what happened, it got checked through, and now he thinks he's good here with 6s or 7s. But with your flush draw on the turn here, again, for the propensity for everybody to slow play at this level, I think you can easily bump this on the turn. And that's probably what I would have done. I mean, I know it's a little bit awkward with shallower stacks, because if you bump it up and the guy shoves, you're like, well, your draw is really not that good. He bets 55, but you could make this like 130 and probably get, the job done, or 140. And especially with deeper stacks, you can make it like 150. Hand like 7s, 8s, 9s are going to fold. And if they call, you've got pretty good equity as long as he doesn't have a deuce, in the sense that you've got an overcard and, flush cards. Things like that. I think that Jonathan actually makes the worst play here, and he calls the bet here. I think it was, again, like 55 into a $100 pot. He calls. Now the pot's 200. Gevic is out of there. So we're looking at a $200 pot here to the river. And the river brings the flush, and Alan makes a full house. And now Alan checks. So he checks the river. Is that a good play? Is that not a good play? If we're in his spot and we bet the turn and a guy calls us, if he's hero calling us with 4s or 5s, and then we come out and bet the river, he's probably not going to call. If he has a flush draw that made a flush and we come out and bet the river, he may just call. But we know that if we check, he's going to bet all of his flushes. So I'm not necessarily giving Alan credit for thinking this through all the way, but in reality, it's actually not a bad play, because you're not going to be able to see guys be able to bet full flushes here at this level. So it just really becomes a question of, this is either a bet if you think that your opponent dynamic in the hand is that he's hero calling you on the turn, or that he's calling you light, where he will continue to call your river bet, but if you check to him, he'll just check it back. So if you think that there's a chance that he's going to check back because he's calling you light, then you need to come out and bet here. But if you think that there's a really good chance that his range is skewed towards him making a flush here on the river, then it's not a bad check here at all. And that's what Alan does. He actually comes out and he checks this river. Again, the pot is 200 here. And Jonathan comes out and bets 90 into 200. And Alan is going to check raise here all in. So once he calls the 90, the pot is like 380, and I think Jonathan has 120 left, so it's 500, 120 for Jonathan to call. And getting that type of price, I don't think there's any way you can fold, because I think that this guy might have made a flush. He might have played a flush in this manner, and that's how you get into these awkward spots in these capped games, and he ends up making the call. Now, the reason why I bring this hand up, though, is that let's say that we were deeper. Let's say that we were deeper and a guy checked the river and we bet and he check raised the river. I'm going to say that that's basically always going to be the nut flush plus. And if we had the nut flush and the raise was pretty big, it's probably going to be a hand like a full house. And we're trying to think of like what types of full houses would the guy have. What would scream out to me would be like, maybe he checked the flop with pocket 9s, bet the turn we called, and then on the river he made 9s full. He also could have a hand like pocket 3s that he decided to play a little bit tricky on the river, letting us bet our flush. But if we have the nut flush and we bet and we get check raised, it's probably going to be a boat. And if we've got the king high flush and we bet the river and we get check raised, it's going to be a boat, or it's going to be the nut flush. Again, pretty much what you want to take away from this hand is that people at this level will almost never check raise bluff the river. It's almost always for value. And I actually did an episode of Live at the Bike tonight, and you probably should not be going for check raise bluffs at this level either. And if you think about it, the reason being is because everyone's betting on the river at these smaller levels are polarized. So a guy is either going to be betting usually a very nutty type hand on the river that he is not going to fold to a check raise, or he's going to be betting a bluff that you can probably call. So the only time that you should actually be making river check raises as bluffs is if you think a guy's there's a high a good probability the guy's bluffing and your hand can't beat a bluff. Like maybe you miss a draw and you only have 7 high. You check to the guy and now all of a sudden he bets and you think there might be a chance that he might be betting a missed draw as well, but you can't call with 6 or 7 high. Then you can throw in the check raise river bluff. But other than that, it's basically suicide to check raise bluff with any type of showdown against a river betting range that is polarized to the nuts or bluff, because there's no point. You can call down and win, and you risk less, as opposed to when he has the nuts and he's never going to fold, versus a check raise. This next hand is going to involve me, and I think it's probably the most interesting hand of the entire week so far. And, sometimes I'll talk about it, and a lot of people don't understand that, especially in No Limit, you can actually check call the turn or make a call on the turn with the intention of folding the river, even though nothing changes. And the reason why we can do that is because we know that our opponent will not fire again, basically. So when he does fire, we know that we're basically behind, and that's kind of the concept here of this hand. So it's going to involve me, and I think I have pocket jacks here, and this guy's limped in here, gets over to me, and excuse me, I've got king jack. I have king jack. And I'm going to bump it up. I'm going to isolate him. I'm going to make it 25. Now remember, this is the same guy that I raised with the aces when he let out with king 10 from the first hand here. Now, the dude over here in seat 8, this is Stan, he makes the smooth call with pocket jacks. And this guy in seat 5 also calls. So it's a 3-way pot here for $75. Boom. 9-3 deuce. Now, when we see a board like this, this is what I talk about when, light bulbs go off in my head. Whether this is a limped pot or whether I am the pre-flop raiser, this is a board that I am prepared to triple barrel. Now, when I over limp from behind in limp boards and a guy bets, I will definitely raise as light as a hand like Jack 10 of hearts here, because I know that if a guy has a 9, he can't take a lot of heat. The same concept can be said with when I'm the pre-flop raiser. I'm definitely prepared to fire multiple barrels at this board, especially if overcard comes on the turn or on the river. This is really one of the boards that I call A+ texture. A+ texture for you to fire multiple barrels on to get a guy off of a hand, because he really can't take the heat unless he's flopped a set. And you can see that it's really unlikely for him to have flopped 2 pair as well. Hands that have got middling cards like 7, 8, 9, deuce 3 rainbow, unless a guy has a set, it's just very difficult for him to have a big hand for obvious reasons here. So I'm loving this board here with my king jack to to fire multiple barrels at. Much to my surprise, though, Jonathan comes out and he bets 40 into 75. Now remember, I had remembered from the beginning of the night that when I raised to 100 with my aces, he quickly folded here. So I figured that he definitely could have a 9 here, and once again, he is leading out, and this is a board that I'm going to fire multiple barrels at. Now again, the problem in capped games is obviously if he bets out here, 45, and I make this 120, and he calls, now all of a sudden the pot's over 300, and he's got maybe a pot size bet left. So this type of move is not quite as effective as it is when you are playing with deeper stacks, like if he's got 600 or 700. But you remember, you can see that the first time I did it back in hand one with my aces, he just folded. So it's not like it's not a profitable play just to raise now. But I do like it when we're a little bit deeper so that we can fire multiple barrels. And again, I go back to the concept that I like to build a pot early on. I like to make big raises early on instead of lead for big bets, because people, it seems to me, get intimidated by the fact of how much they're going to have to call later on in the hand. So he bet, he leads here for 45 into 75, and I'm looking at stack sizes, and I think I make it like probably $1.25. Oh, I make it 105. And he might have led for 35. I think it was 35, and I made it 105, because 45 to 105 is kind of a small raise. So he makes it 35. I make it 105, and I see Stan out of the corner of my eye. I'm like, oh, shit. He's going to have a big hand here. For him to smooth call this type of board, he's got to have probably like an overpair. I don't even know if he's going to call with a hand like ace-9 here, but most likely like an overpair like tens. I've got king-jack, so jacks are unlikely, but he easily could have flopped a set of like nines, threes, deuces, something like that. So the fact that he is interested does not make me happy. And he ends up making this call here with jacks. Now the thing he's got to realize, though, is that if I am not bluffing here, he's in a really tough spot here with jacks. Because, I mean, yeah, I might do it with tens, but if I've got a real hand here, there's definitely more combinations of aces, kings, and queens. And remember, I played a real hand like that last time when I had the aces when Jonathan let out. So it is kind of balanced. So anyway, Stan makes the flat call here, with jacks, and that's easily going to allow Jonathan to get away from his hand. And we're going to be looking at a pot of about $285 here, as I've gotten called from behind, a bet, a raise, and a call here from Stan. So I'm hating my hand here, and I basically decided that I'm just kind of going to give up here, unless I improve to a king or a jack. Now, interesting enough here, I get really lucky. The turn card here is a king, because you can see, obviously, that a jack is no good here, and I'm going to pause for 1 second. I was never intending to fire multiple barrels. I was intending to fire multiple barrels against this guy, because I never think that he's going to lead super strong here. But once Stan basically cold calls the bet and the raise, I think he's really strong. And I never had any intention of, say, like firing the turn if an ace came, or firing the turn if a queen came. I really thought that Stan had a big hand. He could have had tens or jacks or queens, something like that, but he also could easily have flopped a set here. So that's what went through my head. The pot is, it's 200 and again 85. I've got about 500 left here. I decide to check to see what he does. He's got me covered. Now, Stan, he's a nice guy. We were talking on the table. I think that he makes a pretty big mistake here. I mean, in reality, he comes out and he bets really small. Well, I mean, he bet like 105 into 285. And there really is just no purpose for his bet here with jacks, unless he is going to try to run a bluff where he thinks that maybe I had raised with air and I hit a king, and he's going to bet the turn here and then shove all in the river as a bluff. That is the only scenario where he should be betting jacks here. Because in reality, he's always getting everything to fold here on the turn that he's ahead of. And I'm probably only continuing on with things that beat him, like aces, like a king, something like that. He might be able to bluff me off of queens, but in reality, I ended up making this call with king jack. So if I had queens here, I don't think it makes that much any much of difference, because this is exactly what was going through my head. And it brings it back to the point that I made at the beginning of the hand. I said to myself, when I'm thinking here, okay, the pot is this is to get into Bart's head right now. I said, okay, the pot is 280. This guy has bet 100. So now it's 380. It's 100 for me to call. Once I call, now the pot is going to be $580. I can call this bet here and safely check fold the river. But I think getting 4-1, there is enough of a chance that maybe he's betting like a hand like ace-9, tens, jacks, pocket queens right now, something like that, where I can make this call, calling 100 to call for 380, and then have it go to showdown at the river, where it'll go check, check, and I win the hand. Enough of the time that's going to happen for me to make this a profitable call. Now, if he had come out and bet like 300 on the turn, I probably would have just ditched the hand. But when he bets 100 here, I said, I'm going to make this call with the intention of check folding the river, but expecting this to go check, check, and for me to win this at showdown more than 1 out of 3.8 times, which is the $100 that he bets into 380. And that is exactly what is going through my head here. There's no purpose for me to ever check raise this turn because I'm never going to get called by anything. I mean, I don't think that Jacks calls me. I think that he's got a set here. I think that his line is very strong. I think he has here, you know, a set a lot of the time. But again, because he bets so small, and for those reasons why I gave, where I think that this is going to go to showdown enough, I decide that I am going to make this call, and it's a $105 call. Now, what Stan has to realize here is that when I make this call, and I don't know if he was thinking, I said that great no-limit players have to concentrate more on their opponent's range and their own perceived range more so than their cards. And in this scenario, Stan really needs to think of what his perceived range is and what he thinks my range is. Because when he makes that bet and I call, there is just absolutely no way that Jacks can be good here. And I think, especially here now, if a 6 comes, where maybe he had called like a raise with 4-5, although it's unlikely, he needs to understand how strong his perceived range looks here and realize that probably the most profitable play here is to turn his Jacks into a bluff here, because I had every intention of check folding this river to heat. Pot's 580. I've got about 480 left. He throws out an all-in bet here, or he throws out 400. Even if he throws out 300, I am probably snap check folding here. Instead, he checks it back. I think he gets a little bit lost in the hand, and he's upset. And I take it down there with the king. But again, good no-limit players, try to understand your own perceived range and try to understand your opponent's range more so, you know, than your own whole cards. Great little hand there for you. So this is a hand immediately after the last hand, basically, with the king jack, and I just won from Stan. And I'm sitting there and I'm stacking my chips, and I don't do this often, but I pick up pocket queens and I decide to limp in. I don't like really limping in to limp re-raise from up front. I think it's a really weak play. It was first brought up in Doyle Brunson's book. And I think it's really just a play where people that don't want to play post-flop, they'll limp re-raise their big hands so that, you know, they don't have to get scared of basically playing post-flop. The problem with it is just that you don't get value from, like, inferior hands. Now, sometimes you can actually limp re-raise as a bluff, which a lot of people at this level will never do. Like, if you want to limp in with, like, suited aces, I think you can sometimes balance that with a limp re-raise. Or you can balance limping in with your small pocket pairs and limp re-raising them as well, like pocket 4s, pocket 5s. I will tell you that sometimes you can actually pull a limp. If you want to limp re-raise with your big pocket pairs, I think that sometimes it's actually more effective to do from late position. Because it really, especially if you've got aggressive players in the blinds or on the button, if you like over limp in the hijack or the cutoff with a big pocket pair, and then a guy on the button raises you, he is really, and then, you know, he raises, a couple people call, and then you squeeze in between and you back like limp re-raise. No one ever believes that you have a big hand. So just keep that in mind, that sometimes you can actually throw that in, the limp re-raise from late position here. But I actually just decided to limp here with queens. And I might do this 1 out of 20 times. I'm not really sure why I did. I did maybe just kind of wanted to make it look like I was playing my rush or something like that. And I do not get the limp re-raise in with the queens. So I'm going to see this in a limped pot 5 ways. And I know you guys have probably limped in with big pocket pairs, and you get a board like this, and you're like, oh my god, I don't know what to do here. And James, you can see, flops bottom 2 pair, and he comes out and he leads for 20 into about a $25 pot. I think this is sometimes where people go wrong because it can get to a little bit of a sticky scenario, especially when you're playing deeper. I really don't have a problem here with raise folding, and I think sometimes people call a little bit too much. If you call here, you're basically in the dark with people behind you. And I know that No Limit is about protecting your stack as opposed to protecting your hand, but you can put in a small raise for value here, get the draws kind of to be out of the hand behind you, and then safely fold to a re-raise. It's a raise fold as opposed to a bet fold. You know, it's a raise fold, and I don't have any problem with that. What you see is you see guys like we saw Gevic earlier in the night just going broke with, you know, kings races on a board like this. Bet, guy raises, another guy re-raises, and the guy just moves all in, you know, which is just an absolute disaster, especially coming from a guy in the blind who can have a random 2-pair hand, which is exactly what James has here. So he comes out and he makes it 20, and I think I make a pretty good sizing. I think I make it 70. So he bets 20 into 25, and at that point the pot's 65. I raise 50 more. Over to Bala's here in seat number 9. You can see he's thinking about it, but it's going to be real tough for him to continue on, which is exactly the same thing too. Is if this board was like an 8-5 deuce board dry, and a guy let out of the blind here, when we're talking about attacking boards and playing non-fitter fold hold'em, I could make this move with, like, you know, Jack 9 of hearts, a backdoor flush draw and a backdoor straight draw, 7-9. Something like that, a gut shot with an overcard. Because as you can see, a guy with 7-8 is just never going to be able to continue on. And as long as this guy's not leading out with 2-pair, it's a really, really strong play. This would be a great example if this board wasn't so draw heavy, 8-5 deuce rainbow, of attacking a good textured type of board. We actually have this guy over here, remember, who just stacked off, you know, with the aces. And he's actually going to let go of Jack 8 here too, I believe. Oh, excuse me, he's not going to let go of Jack 8. I'm sorry. He's going to make the call, and obviously he's a pretty loose player here. And this kind of saved. Well, it didn't save me because it didn't really make a difference. But Gevic makes this call here to the bet and the raise, which is, you know, pretty bad play. And that brings it back over to James, and James is like, you know, James basically lays the hammer down. I mean, in his spot here with the 5 deuce, you know, with as many draws out here and with me limping in, just as long as I don't have pocket 8s or he gets cooler with deuce 5, I don't really mind him 3-betting here, because a lot of times I'm going to have a draw here when I raise, or I'm going to bluff raise. Now, he doesn't necessarily know that, and you can see that I just easily get away from 2 red queens, you know, without even a second thought. Just a simple raise fold, just like you get into spots when you bet fold. And it gets tricky in cap games because, especially on turns and on rivers, usually you're not deep enough to make raise folds. But when you're playing on early streets or when you're playing deeper, you can definitely raise fold some hands for value. Again, talking about non-fitter fold, and I just gave an example from a couple hands ago how the guy in seat 5 and this guy over here in seat 7 could have attacked that 10 deuce deuce board, even though there was a guy over here in seat 2 that was slow playing. They still should have done it, and this is going to be a spot where I'm going to be involved, where I attack a limped pot, and I think it's just a pretty standard spot. And you can see here that it's going to get limped around here, and I decide to over limp with Jack 9 of spades, and so it's going to get limped and you know, kind of checked around here. And I end up flopping a big hand here, and everyone can say, well, you flopped the combo draw, you know, you've got a gut shot and a spade draw, so of course you're going to come out, you know, and raise. But I got to be honest with you, this guy once again comes out and bets Jonathan, and we can see here actually that he has a weak ace. Now, I didn't know that, but again, taking into account how often he would donk and then fold, you just see it at this level constantly. And keep it in mind, especially when you're the pre-flop raiser, that guys will just donk out with medium strength hands. or like semi-bluffs. They're never leading with a really, really strong hand. Now, this is different because it's a limped pot, but it allows me to attack the limper. But I got to tell you, if I had a hand here like 7-8 of hearts, Jack 10, which was double gutted, maybe even not even Jack 9 with a spade draw, just a Jack 9, or a King 10 of hearts, I'm probably going to raise Jonathan here. Now, I'm never really a proponent of trying to raise a guy off of top pair that will remain top pair. What I mean by that is I don't like to try to raise guys off of when they have aces, because when they have aces, that's always going to be top pair to the board, right? Nothing changes. It's a little bit different from a texture of 9 deuce 3 when a guy leads out with 8 9. He has to contend inherently with all kinds of overcards that can come on future streets. But when a guy's got aces or when he's got kings, a lot of times that's going to remain top pair, and he is just, he's just never going to fold. But in this particular scenario, especially knowing what we had seen from the previous night, this is an easy raise with Jack 9 of spades. And I bump it up. And sometimes you actually need to drive some of the possible higher draws out as well. But I'm telling you that I would have done this with Jack 10. I might have done it with Queen 10. I would have done it with a lot of hands. And this is how you start to advance your game. You attack limped pots. You pay attention to the guys that are going to be able to fold weakish type top pair hands that might lead with medium strength hands, and you attack and you attack and you attack, and it's just that simple. Last hand here of this week is kind of a simple one, but I just can't stress the fact how I want to drive it into your guys' heads, how profitable it is to basically double barrel most turn cards, no matter how quote-unquote scary or how bad that it looks. And, obviously there are some times that you should not double barrel. But this was kind of one of the extreme ones. I've got a decent winning image here. It's a straddled pot, and I raise it up here over this guy's straddle that he had shown that he was a really loose player over here in C2, and I think I made it 30 with Jack 10 suited here. Board comes out pretty good to fire multiple barrels on here. Now there are a couple of diamonds, 9 5 3 here with 2 diamonds. If it was a rainbow board, it would be a really good board. Same kind of thing when I talk about how I like Queen Jack. I like Jack 10 here. Most turn cards give me some sort of equity. A Jack or a 10 runs me into top pair. A Queen or a King gives me a straight draw. An ace is, of course, the ultimate scare card. An 8 gives me open-ended, and a 7 gives me a gut shot. So there's a lot of turn cards here that increase my equity. If this 3 was a spade, I would even say that this is like a really good flop for me. I mean, probably 1/2 to 2/3 of the deck on the turn is going to improve my hand if this 3 was a spade, whether that's a spade, a pair, or some sort of straight draw. He checks it over to me. I think I bet 40 into about a $60 pot here. Now he has ace 8. That is up correctly. Ace of diamonds, 8 offsuit. And he is going to end up making this call. And you might say, wow, that's, crazy play. And it is a very, very light call. But you would be shocked from what I see in Live at the Bike how light people call the flop with. Now that turn card's a deuce here. And obviously it's an undercard to second pair. It's not the best barrel card, in the sense that it puts up 2 diamonds, it puts up 2 clubs. If he had a wheel draw, he might have run into a pair. He might have run into a wheel with like ace 4. It also completes 4-6. If he had a hand like 4-5, he is now open-ended. 5-6, he's probably not folding the turn. Actually, the funny thing in retrospect is this is probably not a good card to double barrel. In retrospect, I actually think that this is too thin. I was going to come and say this hand, and I was going to be like, it doesn't matter what the turn card is. You just double barrel, because I'm going to bet here, and this guy's going to end up folding. But now that I look at this card, I think this is actually one of the cards that you should not double barrel. I think this is a mistake by me. It ended up being that Alan folds here because he has ace-8 offsuit. And the reason why I bring this hand up is just because of the fact that, again, people call so light. Like if he had called here with an ace-king or an ace-queen, I'm just betting regardless. You know what I mean? I'm just betting, and because people are going to call so light, you know, they're going to take it down. But in actuality here, probably the turns that I should not bet are like a 4, a deuce, a 6, and possibly a 7. I don't like it. Like, I might get him off of a hand like 7-5 or 8-5, but if he's definitely going to continue to call me with a 9, this deuce gives so many types of straight draws to what would probably call with middle pair that I just actually don't really like this bet. And sometimes, like, you know, the river pair, I would check this back and the river pair is the deuce, and I just go check, check, and the guy wins it with ace-8, and I'm like, damn, I should have just double barreled. But to be honest with you, it is up to a certain point that you could probably double barrel almost any card here, with the exception of the deuce, the 4, and the 6, I would say, for the most part. And so I just wanted to go over a little bit. So this is kind of turned from a little hand of that you should double barrel anything to a little bit of hand reading, and why now that I recognize the fact that this is probably not a good card to double barrel here with the deuce. But it ended up working out for me. I ended up making a nice little win for the session, $400 or $500 over 3 hours. So that's going to actually wrap things up for us this week. I appreciate you guys all subscribing. Again, tune in to Deuce Plays Premium over at deucescrack.com, and check out Live at the Bike every Tuesday and Friday from 7:30 to 10:30 Pacific time. We will see you guys all next week.